Hi, crime junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers. And I know you're probably not used to seeing my face. I always get told it's a little trippy for people the first time they see the disembodied voice that they know so well actually come out of a real life human. And that's because I don't always make video podcasts, but when I do, you know it's going to be good, like today. Now, millions of you already listen to my weekly true crime podcast, Crime Junkie, which is part of my company AudioChuck, with a network of a dozen other shows. We are your one-stop shop for the most trusted, responsible, compelling, mission-driven true crime content. And one of those podcasts is my other weekly show, The Deck. The Deck is super special to me. It was inspired by my time serving on the board of my local Crime Stoppers. I came across this deck of playing cards with cold cases on them, and I found out that this was actually an initiative that law enforcement agencies across the country were utilizing to try and breathe new life into cold cases. They would pass these out in prisons and hope that they would get in the hands of the right people who might have information. So I took that concept and kind of ran with it. Every week, we now tell you the stories behind the cards, hoping that information reaches the right ears now. And, now maybe the right eyes. Now, the reason I'm doing this episode now as a video is because, there's something about this week's card that I couldn't let go of. I needed to know that I did everything in my power to make sure as many people as possible heard this story, because in the 6.5 years that I've been telling victim stories and the lifetime that I've been consuming them, few stories have haunted me the way that this one has. And it's one of those cases that have been living in my head, like on repeat. One where the killer was so bold, so confident that police would never catch him, that he taunted them. And for nearly 30 years, he's been able to get away with it. But I think that's coming to an end. Because even though it seems like he tried to do everything he could to erase himself from the crime scene and the victim's life, it looks like he didn't cover all of his tracks. And he may have left something behind that could finally give him away. Our card this week is Dana Chisholm, the Jack of Diamonds from Washington, D.C. I'm Ashley Flowers, and this is The Deck. On Monday, February 27, 1995, over 400 miles away from D.C. in Rock Hill, South Carolina, the landline at the Chisholm residence rang out in the middle of the night. It woke up Johnny and Joe Gary from a deep sleep, and in his half-awake state, Johnny clocked the time, close to 1:30 a.m. And for where they lived in the South, everyone knew you didn't dare make a call past supper time, unless, of course, it was an emergency. Groggy and dazed, Joe Gary was the one to answer the phone, but the person on the other end spoke loud enough for Johnny to hear. And it was a man introducing himself as Detective Lewis Douglas with the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. And to their utter shock, the detective said that their 25-year-old daughter Dana was in jail. The detective explained that they had this sting operation at the Omni Hotel there in D.C., and Dana was one of the women that they'd arrested that night for charges related to sex work. Now, that didn't sound like their daughter at all. Dana had an office job in the city. The only time she'd ever really been in trouble was with her parents right after high school. She started hanging out with the wrong crowd. She got mixed up in drugs for a minute, but that was years in the past. And at no time had there ever been any arrests for sex work. But more than what this detective was saying, Johnny said that the way that this guy talked, his attitude, his energy, were just off. Here's retired detective Jim Trainum. He remembers the details of Dana's case well from his time reviewing cold cases at MPD.
Mr. Chisholm talked about how he kind of felt like the phone call itself was odd because the person who was identifying himself as Douglas seemed to be excited. He was saying that he was going to get a promotion.
The man on the other end of the phone carried on, saying that Dana was going to be arraigned. She should be out at some point during the day. And then he said something like, "Don't worry, she's fine, just call in the morning. It's late." And although the tone of the conversation was a bit bizarre, this guy did leave the Chisholms a phone number that they could call later to check in, which was the one thing that made this call seem more legit. So all they could do at that point was wait around, worrying about their daughter until they hopefully heard from her later that day. But when the wee hours of the morning turned into more reasonable business hours and there was still no word from Dana, Johnny decided to give that number a call. And I know what you're thinking. It was fake. That's what I expected, but it wasn't. The line rang, and it was, in fact, MPD. But when Johnny asked for Detective Douglas, and then Detective Douglas got on the phone, his response instantly made Johnny's heart sink.
Well, the real Detective Douglas was actually very puzzled about what was going on. Of course, he didn't call the family. He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. A detective in the 2nd District wouldn't be one who would be doing a prostitution sting anyway. That would be a part of another totally different unit. So he would not be somebody who would have participated in something like this.
It was all a lie. Now, when he learned about the previous call, the real Detective Douglas asked where Dana worked, but Johnny was hesitant to say. I mean, if this was all some sick prank, then he didn't want to get his daughter into any trouble at the Hudson Institute, this political think tank where she was a secretary. Johnny recalled Detective Douglas saying something along the lines of, "But don't you want to find your daughter?" Which felt weird to Johnny because he didn't think he'd used any language that implied he was necessarily looking for her, just that he was worried about Dana being detained. But desperate, Johnny ended up giving Douglas his daughter's work address anyway. Now, there was no missing persons report filed or case opened on Dana at the time, but Detective Douglas let Johnny know that he would look into it and call him back.
He didn't know what was going on. So that's when he decided that he would just go by the house where she lived and check on her, see what's happening. When he got there and there was no answer, that's when he left his card.
Douglas never did call Johnny back to let him know that he didn't have any luck making contact with Dana. He might have just been waiting to hear something back from her, or may have even assumed this was all a bunch of nothing.